Dans La parole est à vous, nous vous proposons aujourd'hui de rencontrer Auguste Cole, auteur américain spécialiste de l'impact des nouvelles technologies sur la géopolitique. Co-auteur de Control, l'ère de l'IA et de l'hypersurveillance a déjà commencé, avec P.W. Singer qui vient de paraître aux éditions Buchet-Chastel. Il revient sur les conséquences réelles de l'irruption de l'intelligence artificielle et de la robotique sur les techniques de surveillance et la montée des extrémismes sur la culture et la politique. Il partage également avec nous sa vision d'une intelligence artificielle et de la robotique qui vont transformer tous les aspects de la société au cours des années 2020 et 2030.
Artificial intelligence and robotics is about to transform society. And that means everything from how we work to the very nature of politics and our relationship with power in the countries we live in, to the identities we have, which many of us derive from our work. The automation movement has been underway for a long time to lower costs for companies who do everything from run workshops to manufacture goods. What's significant about what is happening in the 2020s, in the next decade here, is that same wave of automation that targeted manufacturing is increasingly targeting services, high skill jobs. You're going to see much more of this, much like we did in the 90s with the offshoring of what in the US we call call centers, people who do customer service over the phone. That same trend is underway with artificial intelligence because new types of AI software can do the same discovery activities that a very expensive legal associate at a law firm can do, or the balance sheet analysis and income statement analysis that an investment banker might make a judgment on can in fact also be automated. And what's different is that many of the conversations in our business world and the political world about automation tend to focus on people whose jobs are at a lower wage or require fewer skills or less education. What you're going to start to see, though, is the replacement of positions for some of a society like France or America's highest and best trained workers, people who have spent 8 years in university and post-university employment, people with MBAs and law degrees who spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in America to reach the pinnacle of their career. And suddenly that is going to be taken away. And the political implication is quite profound because suddenly the middle class and upper middle class becomes quite disaffected. And that creates opportunities for politicians that want to capitalize on that anger and exploit it. We already see that in America. We already see that in France on the right, that anger itself is its own platform politically. And I'm afraid that some of the transformation that we're going to see with robotics and AI in societies is going to lead to more of that. That is, in fact, the central theme of Control, is how this collision of technology and humanity can lead to potentially large amounts of conflict. The rise of hypersurveillance globally is a major trend right now that's only going to increase and accelerate as we see the use of Internet of Things, or the sensorization of everything, from the watches we wear to the cars we drive to the consumer products we buy. At the same time, all of that data, right? I mean, there's more data being collected than most computer systems can process, certainly more than most analysts can go over. And what's new now is that supercomputing capabilities, because of AI, allow systems to make sense of that. So what that means is that a government or even a company or even a small group of people may know more about a society than the people who live in it because of hypersurveillance. All of the information, whether it's biometric data, like how you react in a certain situation to seeing the news with your heart rate, that can be correlated by using the kinds of artificial intelligence analysis software that's already existing in our current information economy. And what that means is that the more you can understand and model not just an individual but a whole society, the easier it is to influence it, the easier it is to control it. And that should be very worrying. And I think it's part of the conversation that we have to be having right now about what are the limits of surveillance. What are the boundaries that we don't want governments and especially companies to cross? Of course, security in the 21st century requires a good amount of surveillance to stop terrorism, particularly, but also thinking about nation threats like China or Russia, how they spy, steal ideas, run their own influence operations. And so there's a tension, of course, in that too. But that's part of what a good debate in a society can help reconcile. And so my sense is that as you see more and more of these technologies wielded by governments, you're simultaneously going to see more of them wielded by individuals and groups. So the ability to organize, to capitalize on the kinds of sentiments, again, as I mentioned earlier, this idea that the disaffected populations in a society are going to grow as automation replaces more jobs, as extremism is more optimized algorithmically. Those kinds of groups will be able to organize more easily now. And that is, in effect, going to be a counterforce to the same hyper-surveillance paradigm on the government side. So governments, on one hand, find it easier to surveil and maybe control their populations. Simultaneously, populations find it easier to organize and push back. And to me, when you see both those technological changes in that way, it's going to lead to a lot of conflict. And so a book like Control really tries to explore what that's going to look like in America. And I think the lessons within it are very applicable to Europe, especially France, where we've already seen the rise of disaffected people mobilizing in the streets with the Gilets jaunes movement that I think are an actual preview of what we may see more of in the next decade. The question of whether AI should be something that gives us hope or makes us afraid is a big one. And it's so important. And it's really this question is really at the heart of this book, Control. I am myself like to say I'm an optimist who stares into the abyss, somebody who believes in the inherent goodness of people, but I also know quite well how things can go wrong. Much of the conversation about technology that we have about its risks, whether AI, robotics, robot revolution uprising takes over the planet, wipes out humanity. I don't worry about that, at least not in the near term. What I do worry about is this larger trend of technology changing society faster than society can change itself. And that creates a lot of conflict and a lot of pain, really, for people who are trying to live in a world that is passing them by. And there's a pretty good chance that more and more people will be left behind by some of the big breakthroughs that happen in really everyday kinds of robotics and artificial intelligence. Imagine drones that deliver your groceries. Imagine that your children are in a school where some of the education is further virtualized. The pandemic during a period of time with COVID showed us how much can be essentially turned over to software or virtualized. We're getting right now a preview of what this may be like further in the future by this very traumatic, global experience of living through a pandemic, which we're still not out of. But if anything, it should be a signal of what's coming. And we have to think very hard, of course, about how technology is going to change our world. Is it going to make the world better, or is it going to make the world worse? One of my bigger concerns, too, is that many of the people developing and working on these technologies don't consider the risks. It's really important that engineers, designers, executives, especially investors, think through and quite clearly what are the potential societal risks that their products, even if they seem innocuous. An app like Facebook started with a very kind of simple premise of trying to essentially connect people in a fairly straightforward way. And now has been used to produce everything from political violence to insurrection, to other more kind of egregious personal crimes. So we have to really think about the downsides. And I'm somebody who does this professionally. I think constantly about risks and potential problems. But that's more of what we need to see. My hope is that when readers in France, come across a book like Control, they can enjoy it because it's a fast-paced techno thriller. It's about an FBI agent who's hunting a terrorist with a robot partner in Washington, D.C. They'll get a glimpse of the future America and perhaps their own country. But I also want them to read it and have a better understanding of the facts. And the book is based on technologies that are all real, so that when you read about the AI technologies in Control, when you read about the robotics technologies in Control, they're all based on technologies that are available today.